The silent collapse. Inside a man's mind after divorce. There's a kind of silence that comes after divorce. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that screams. It's the moment the papers are signed, the house feels too big, and the phone stops ringing. That's when most men begin to realize the real damage wasn't the relationship ending. It was the identity collapse that came with it. Psychologically, divorce strikes men at their core because it dismantles the structure their mind was built around. For years, his brain was wired to serve, protect, provide, and belong. Suddenly, that purpose is gone. The human mind cannot process that kind of loss easily. It's not just emotional, it's neurological. His dopamine system drops, motivation fades, his sleep breaks. Even eating becomes mechanical, like survival rather than living. He might tell people, "I'm fine," but he's not. He's experiencing what psychologists call post-marital disorientation, a psychological fog where logic still works, but meaning disappears. He wakes up, goes to work, does everything right, but internally he's disconnected, like watching his own life from a distance. Friends might say, "You're free now," but freedom without emotional grounding feels like falling without gravity. The man who once stood strong for everyone suddenly doesn't know who to stand for anymore. He misses not just his partner, he misses being needed, being someone's reason. And that absence doesn't just sit in the heart, it spreads through every thought. Men rarely process this openly. Society taught them that pain equals weakness. So they stay quiet, smile at gatherings, scroll through social media pretending they've moved on. But deep down, they're negotiating with memories, trying to understand how love turned into distance and why silence now feels louder than any fight ever did. Inside the male psyche, guilt and failure start to fuse. He replays the past again and again, trying to identify the exact moment things went wrong. That mental looping is the brain's desperate attempt to restore control. But it only deepens the pain, keeping him trapped in psychological limbo. And then comes the numbness, not sadness, numbness. It's the mind's defense mechanism, shutting off emotions to prevent further damage. But when emotions go numb, so does joy, curiosity, and passion. He stops feeling alive. He functions, but doesn't live. This is the hidden part no one sees, the slow collapse behind the strong face, the internal breakdown masked as independence. It's why psychologists say divorce doesn't end with signatures. It begins there, because after divorce, a man doesn't just lose a relationship. He loses a mirror that once reflected who he was. And until he rebuilds that identity from the inside out, his silence will keep echoing louder than his words. The isolation trap. When loneliness turns into psychology. After divorce, most men don't scream, cry, or ask for help. They disappear quietly. It's not drama, it's defense. The male brain doesn't process loss through expression. It processes through isolation. He withdraws, believing solitude will heal him. But what he doesn't know is that isolation isn't healing. It's slow psychological decay. Inside that empty apartment, every object becomes a memory. The half-empty wardrobe, the untouched coffee mug, the quiet bed, all of them talk in silence. He avoids home for hours because every corner reminds him of what used to be. So he starts staying out late, scrolling endlessly, or numbing the pain with alcohol or work. But the mind can't be tricked for long. It always circles back to the emptiness. Psychologists call this stage emotional displacement. When a man replaces emotional pain with activity, he starts doing more, but feeling less. Work becomes his shield. Distractions become his drugs. But behind every overworked hour lies one question his mind whispers at night. Am I still worth something if no one loves me anymore? Loneliness changes the brain's chemistry. Studies show that prolonged isolation activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. That's why he feels drained, tired, and restless at once, because his body thinks he's injured. In truth, he is, just not where anyone can see. And the cruel part is that society celebrates his silence. People say, he's strong, he's moved on. But no one sees that strength is actually suppression. He's not healed. He's surviving by burying every emotion under layers of, I'm fine. He laughs at parties, but goes home to a bed that feels foreign. He dates someone new, but his mind compares every smile to a ghost from his past. He tries to start over, but something inside him still lives in yesterday. The deeper problem is what psychologists call emotional dysregulation. When feelings exist but can't find words. He doesn't know what he feels anymore. Anger, regret, emptiness, guilt. It's all tangled. And since men are rarely taught how to name emotions, they convert them into one thing: silence. That silence then becomes the language of their pain. And over time, silence changes personality. He becomes colder, more distant, not because he doesn't care, but because caring once broke him. He stops opening up, fearing that honesty leads only to loss. He may look composed, but inside, he's shrinking, slowly detaching from everything that once made him human. If you look closely, you'll notice the symptoms. He stops planning, stops dreaming, stops laughing the way he used to. His eyes may still move, but they've lost direction. He exists in a loop. Wake up, survive, sleep, repeat. Loneliness doesn't kill instantly. It dissolves the spirit one day at a time, until one morning he wakes up realizing he's no longer living for joy. He's living for habit, and that's the real tragedy. Not that he lost someone, but that he's starting to lose himself. The inner war, guilt, anger, and the search for control. At some point, the silence turns into noise, not outside, but inside his head. Every regret, every what if, every memory he tried to bury begins to echo louder. That's when grief mutates into guilt. Men after divorce often carry invisible guilt. Guilt for not trying harder, for failing as a husband, or for walking away when they had no strength left. Even when the breakup wasn't their fault, the male psyche is wired to feel responsible for the collapse. Psychologically, men equate failure in love with failure in life. That belief becomes a mental trap, one that keeps him replaying the past, trying to rewrite what's already over. He'll lie awake at night, imagining conversations that never happened, apologies he never gave, forgiveness he never received. The brain does this because it's searching for closure, a concept the mind craves, but the heart resists. And when closure doesn't come, frustration begins to rise. That frustration slowly turns into anger, not always explosive, but cold, the kind of anger that hides behind a calm face. Psychologists call this suppressed rage. When emotional energy has nowhere to go, it starts turning inward, feeding anxiety, insomnia, and self-hate. He starts blaming himself for everything, for being too soft, too blind, too emotional, too logical. It never ends. And when the pain becomes unbearable, the male brain looks for control. Any form of it. Control is safety, so he starts controlling his schedule, his food, his gym routine, anything predictable. He'll count calories, clean obsessively, or dive into work, not because he's disciplined, but because order gives the illusion of peace, the truth. It's his way of fighting chaos. Some men, unable to find control internally, turn it outward. They try to control people, new partners, or circumstances. Not from arrogance, but from fear of losing again. Psychologically, this is known as compensatory control. When the mind tries to manage external chaos to avoid internal collapse. Then there are those who escape instead. They dive into distractions, new relationships, travel, substances, or constant socializing. They tell themselves they're healing, but they're just avoiding. The problem with avoidance is that it numbs the surface while the wound beneath keeps rotting. What most people don't see is that anger and guilt are two sides of the same coin. One shouts, the other whispers, but both come from the same wound, loss of meaning. When a man loses his sense of meaning, the world becomes gray. Food tastes dull. Laughter feels fake. Achievements feel empty. This is what psychologists call existential depression, when sadness isn't just emotional, but philosophical. He's not asking, why did she leave anymore? He's asking, why am I even here? And that's the most dangerous point in the post-divorce journey. When pain becomes identity, when suffering becomes the only thing that still feels familiar. He doesn't want to be miserable, but misery feels like home. It's predictable. It doesn't leave. It doesn't betray him. That's the dark paradox of a broken man. He craves peace, yet fears what life without pain would feel like, because pain, at least, is proof that something once mattered. If he stays here too long, his heart starts closing. He won't trust easily, won't love freely, won't hope fully. He'll look calm on the surface, but inside, he's living in emotional lockdown. A man surrounded by walls he built to stay safe, not realizing those same walls are now his prisons. The rebirth, rebuilding the self after the storm. Every man who survives the collapse eventually faces one question. What now? Not, what did I lose or what went wrong? But who am I now that everything is gone? That's the beginning of psychological rebirth. It doesn't happen with a motivational speech or a sudden realization. It begins quietly. The morning he wakes up and doesn't feel the same level of pain. The day he looks in the mirror and sees not what was lost, but what still remains. After the chaos, the male brain begins to rewire. Science calls it neural adaptation. The mind's natural way of building new emotional pathways when old ones collapse. That's why healing feels slow. It's not weakness, it's reconstruction. The brain is learning how to feel safe again, how to trust again, how to exist without the old story. This phase is fragile but sacred, because here he begins to realize something profound. He was never defined by the relationship. He was defined by what he gave within it. And just because it ended doesn't mean his capacity to love, protect, or build is gone. He still carries those traits, only now they belong fully to him. Many men, after divorce, develop something psychologists call post-traumatic growth. It's not about forgetting the pain. It's about using it to evolve. He starts seeing patterns, how his choices were shaped by old wounds, how his emotional unawareness contributed to the downfall, how he used control to avoid vulnerability. That's not self-blame anymore. That's awareness. And awareness is the first sign of wisdom. Slowly, he starts making peace with his past. He no longer tries to rewrite what happened. He tries to understand it. Forgiveness becomes less about the other person and more about freeing his own mind from the endless replay of regret. That's when clarity starts to return. Not the kind that makes everything perfect, but the kind that allows him to breathe without the weight of yesterday. He starts finding comfort in solitude. Not loneliness, but solitude. The difference? Loneliness is emptiness that seeks someone else. Solitude is peace found within yourself. He begins to enjoy small moments again. Coffee in silence, sunsets, music, writing, or long drives with no destination. Each moment becomes a reminder he survived. He doesn't need to prove strength anymore by pretending. Real strength now looks like vulnerability, being open, honest, and emotionally aware. He no longer hides from emotions. He studies them. He no longer fears loss. He accepts that everything temporary can still be beautiful. And now, when he looks back, he doesn't see failure anymore. He sees transformation. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself completely.